The vastness of space stretched infinitely around the small human spacecraft, the Voyager. Aiden Hayes, a seasoned astronaut and geologist, piloted the ship on a solitary mission to chart new territories for the expanding human frontier. The mission had been routine until a sudden and catastrophic engine failure sent him hurtling towards an uncharted planet, one not marked on any galactic map. Alarms blared as Aiden frantically tried to regain control of the vessel. Sweat dripped down his face as he maneuvered through a debris field, the planet's gravity pulling him in faster and faster. He initiated emergency landing protocols, bracing himself for impact. The ship shook violently, metal creaking under the stress. Moments later, it crashed through the dense atmosphere, breaking apart in a storm of fire and smoke. When the dust settled, Aiden awoke to find himself in the wreckage, miraculously alive but stranded in an alien wilderness. The landscape around him was unlike anything he had ever seen, a lush, vibrant forest with towering trees whose leaves shimmered with a metallic blue hue under the strange alien sky. The air was thick with humidity and filled with the sounds of unknown creatures. His ship was a smoking ruin, and the communication systems were completely fried. With no way to call for help, Aiden realized he was utterly alone on this mysterious planet. He took a deep breath, trying to quell the rising panic. He had to survive. Gathering what supplies he could salvage, he set out to explore his surroundings, hoping to find food, water, and perhaps some sign of civilization. As Aiden ventured deeper into the wilderness, he marveled at the alien beauty surrounding him. The trees seemed to reach up to the heavens, their leaves glittering like precious gems. Strange flowers glowed with an inner light, casting soft hues across the ground. Small luminescent creatures flitted about, their wings leaving trails of light in the air. It was a world that seemed almost magical, and yet Aiden knew better than to let his guard down. The flora and fauna were like nothing he had ever encountered before, both breathtakingly beautiful and potentially deadly. He had to be careful. There was no telling what dangers might lurk in the shadows. He moved cautiously, using his training to identify potential threats and to find sources of fresh water and edible plants. Days passed, and Aiden adapted to his new environment, fashioning a makeshift shelter and learning to survive off the land. But despite his growing self-sufficiency, he couldn't shake the feeling of profound loneliness. He was a single human in a vast alien wilderness, with no hope of rescue. One day, while searching for food, Aiden stumbled upon a clearing unlike any he had seen before. It was a serene, secluded spot, surrounded by a ring of towering trees with golden leaves. In the center of the clearing was a small pool of crystal-clear water, its surface reflecting the light in a mesmerizing dance. And then he saw her. Kneeling beside the pool, her hands delicately cupping water to her lips, was the most beautiful being Aiden had ever seen. She had long, flowing blonde hair that seemed to capture the light, shimmering with a golden hue. Her skin was pale, almost luminescent, and her eyes were a deep, captivating blue that held the wisdom of ages. She was alien, and yet there was a familiarity in her beauty that struck Aiden to his core. He froze, unsure whether to approach or stay hidden. She was clearly not human, but she didn't look like any of the dangerous creatures he had encountered so far. His heart raced, a mix of fear and fascination gripping him. Before he could decide what to do, she turned and saw him. For a moment, time seemed to stand still. Their eyes locked, and in that instant, Aiden felt something shift within him, a powerful, inexplicable pull, as if fate itself had drawn them together. The girl didn't move or speak, but her eyes widened with a mix of surprise and curiosity. Aiden raised his hand slowly to show he meant no harm. "I'm not here to hurt you," he said softly, though he knew she likely wouldn't understand his words. He took a cautious step forward, his heart pounding in his chest. To his surprise, the girl didn't flee. Instead, she tilted her head slightly, studying him with a look of genuine interest. Aiden couldn't help but smile, feeling a strange sense of relief wash over him. In this vast, alien wilderness, he had found another living being, and for the first time since his crash, he didn't feel so alone. As they stood there, just a few feet apart, Aiden couldn't shake the feeling that he had stumbled upon something extraordinary. He had no idea who this girl was or why she was here, but one thing was certain: he had to find out. Aiden stood still, every muscle in his body tense with anticipation. The alien girl remained by the water's edge, her deep blue eyes never leaving his. There was a serene quality to her, a quiet grace that seemed almost otherworldly. He couldn't understand why, but he felt an inexplicable urge to reach out to her, to bridge the gap between them. He took a slow, cautious step forward, holding his hands up in a non-threatening manner. "My name is Aiden," he said softly, unsure if she could understand him but feeling the need to speak anyway. "I'm stranded here. Like you, maybe?" The girl watched him intently, her expression unreadable. Her blonde hair cascaded over her shoulders, catching the light in a way that made it seem almost ethereal. Aiden took another step, and then another, moving slowly to avoid startling her. He could see the slight rise and fall of her chest as she breathed, her body perfectly still otherwise, like a deer caught in the sights of a hunter. He stopped a few feet away, close enough to see the fine details of her features, her delicate skin, the faint shimmer of gold in her hair, the subtle tilt of her lips. She seemed so human, and yet there was an undeniable strangeness about her, something that spoke of a world far removed from his own. Aiden crouched down to her level, keeping his movements slow and deliberate. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small silver compass, one of the few personal items he had managed to salvage from the wreckage of his ship. He held it out to her, a gesture of goodwill. "This is a compass," he explained, turning it slowly so she could see the needle inside spinning. "It helps me find my way." The girl's eyes flicked to the compass, her expression softening with curiosity. She leaned forward slightly, her hand hovering just above the device, as if unsure whether it was safe to touch. Aiden nodded encouragingly, smiling to show her it was okay. After a moment's hesitation, she reached out and gently touched the compass. Her fingers were slender and graceful, her touch light as a feather. The needle spun wildly for a second before settling, pointing north. Aiden watched her face light up with a childlike wonder, and he couldn't help but chuckle softly. She looked up at him, and for the first time Aiden saw a hint of a smile. It was small, barely more than a twitch of her lips, but it was there. And in that moment something shifted between them, a silent understanding, a fragile connection that bridged the vast divide of their worlds. The girl pointed to herself and spoke a single word, her voice soft and melodic. "Cilia," she said, her accent strange but beautiful, like the sound of wind through the trees. Aiden nodded, repeating her name slowly. "Cilia, it's nice to meet you." Cilia tilted her head slightly, her eyes narrowing as if she were trying to decipher his words. She then pointed to him, her expression expectant. Aiden understood and touched his chest. "Aiden," he said. Cilia's lips moved, forming the sound carefully. "Aiden." He felt a warmth spread through his chest at the sound of his name on her lips. It was a simple exchange, but to Aiden it felt like the beginning of something profound. He had found another soul in this vast alien wilderness, a soul that, like him, seemed lost and searching for something. Over the next few days, Aiden and Cilia continued to meet in the clearing by the crystal-clear pool. Despite the language barrier, they found ways to communicate through gestures, expressions, and shared actions. Cilia's curiosity about Aiden was evident. She watched him closely, mimicking his movements and sounds, trying to learn his strange human ways. Aiden, in turn, found himself captivated by her every gesture, every subtle expression. There was a delicate elegance in the way she moved, a softness in her eyes that seemed to hold the mysteries of the universe. She was unlike anyone he had ever met, and he couldn't help but be drawn to her. One afternoon, while they were sitting by the water's edge, Cilia took Aiden's hand and placed it over her heart. She looked into his eyes, her expression serious, as if she were trying to convey something important. Aiden could feel her heartbeat, strong and steady beneath his palm, and he was struck by the intimacy of the moment. She spoke a few words in her language, her tone urgent, and then placed her hand over his heart in return. Aiden understood that she was asking him to trust her, to share something deeply personal. He nodded, covering her hand with his own and giving it a gentle squeeze. He decided to show her a small holographic projector he had salvaged from his ship. Activating it, he displayed a rotating image of Earth, his home planet. Cilia's eyes widened with awe as she watched the blue and green orb spin slowly before them. She reached out to touch the hologram, her fingers passing through the light as if trying to grasp the image. Aiden pointed to the hologram and then to himself, saying, "Earth, my home." He hoped she would understand. Cilia nodded slowly, her gaze fixed on the image. She then pointed to herself and spoke a word that Aiden guessed was the name of her home planet. She drew a shape in the air with her finger, a cluster of stars that Aiden recognized from his stargazing nights. It was a constellation that didn't exist in the human catalog, marking a star system far beyond human reach. As they continued to share pieces of their worlds, their bond grew stronger. Aiden began to understand that Celia was not just any alien. She was different. There was a depth to her that hinted at a life of complexity and perhaps even pain. She would sometimes look out into the forest with a distant, haunted expression, as if remembering something lost. One day, while they were gathering food together, Aiden asked about her past using the few words they had managed to teach each other. Celia hesitated, her expression turning somber. She gestured towards the distant horizon, where dark, jagged mountains loomed, and spoke in her language, her tone filled with sadness. Aiden wished he could understand her better, could offer her more than just silent companionship. But for now, he listened, nodding as she spoke, letting her know that whatever her story was, he would be there to hear it. That night, as they sat by a small fire they had built together, Celia leaned her head on Aiden's shoulder. He wrapped his arm around her, holding her close. The warmth of the fire, the soft sounds of the forest, and the presence of Celia beside him made him feel, for the first time since he had crashed on this planet, that he was exactly where he was meant to be. In that quiet moment, under the canopy of alien stars, Aiden realized he was falling in love with Celia. He didn't know what the future held for them, whether he would ever see Earth again, or if Celia would find her way back to her people. But for now, they had each other, and that was enough. The days continued to pass, and with each one, Aiden and Celia grew closer. Their bond transcended language. It was built on shared experiences, mutual trust, and a growing affection that neither could deny. Aiden had never felt this way before. Every time Celia smiled at him, his heart seemed to skip a beat. There was something magnetic about her presence, something that made him feel more alive than he had ever felt on Earth. Celia was equally fascinated by Aiden. She watched him as he crafted tools from the materials they found in the forest, her eyes bright with curiosity. She often mimicked his actions, learning quickly, her natural grace making even the simplest movements look elegant. She had a knack for understanding things without explanation, picking up on Aiden's intentions and mirroring them with uncanny accuracy. One morning as they sat by the pool where they first met, Celia pointed to the sky, where the planet's 3 moons were visible even in daylight. She then pointed to herself and spoke a few words in her language. Aiden nodded, understanding that she was trying to tell him about her home, possibly another moon or distant world. Aiden smiled and took a stick, drawing in the soft dirt. He sketched out the solar system as best he could, placing Earth and its moon in their positions. Celia watched intently, her brow furrowed in concentration. When he finished, she nodded, her expression softening into a smile. She took the stick from him and began to draw her own star system, a set of stars in a triangular formation with several moons around one of the stars. Aiden watched her, fascinated. "So, you come from a moon," he mused aloud, pointing to the drawing. Celia nodded, smiling as she made a swirling motion around the moons, perhaps indicating a unique orbit or a way of life that revolved around those celestial bodies. Their bond grew not just in communication, but in their daily survival. They gathered food together, explored the forest's hidden paths, and even built a better shelter from the elements. Celia showed Aiden which plants were safe to eat, and in turn he showed her how to make a fishing spear, teaching her the skill of catching fish from the nearby stream. They laughed and played in the water, their laughter echoing through the trees. One evening, after a long day of exploring, they sat together by a fire. Celia pulled out a small carved object from a pouch at her waist. It was a wooden pendant shaped like a crescent moon, intricately detailed with tiny carvings that glittered in the firelight. She handed it to Aiden, her expression serious but her eyes filled with warmth. Aiden took the pendant, feeling its smooth surface against his skin. "Is this for me?" he asked softly. Celia nodded, smiling shyly. She touched her chest and then his, as if to say the pendant was a part of her that she wanted him to carry. Aiden's heart swelled with emotion. He carefully placed the pendant around his neck, feeling its weight against his chest. It was a simple gesture, but to him it felt like a promise, an unspoken vow that no matter what happened, they would face it together. Curiosity about each other's worlds continued to draw Aiden and Celia closer. One day, Celia took Aiden's hand and led him through the dense forest to a hidden cave she had not shown him before. It was tucked away in a secluded part of the wilderness, its entrance partially concealed by thick vines and towering rocks. Inside the cave, Aiden's breath was taken away. The walls were covered in intricate paintings, illuminated by the glow of bioluminescent fungi that cast a soft, ethereal light throughout the space. The paintings depicted scenes of an alien world, a beautiful moon with golden fields, towering crystal formations, and vast cities that seemed to float in the air. Aiden walked closer, examining the images. He saw depictions of beings like Celia, with the same golden hair and sapphire eyes, engaging in what looked like rituals or celebrations. But there were also scenes of conflict, battles fought against shadowy figures, with the golden-haired beings standing in defiance. Celia touched his arm, guiding him further into the cave. She pointed to a particular painting on the far wall, a depiction of a young girl standing alone, her face marked with a symbol that Aiden had seen Celia draw in the dirt before. Celia placed her hand over her heart, then pointed to the girl in the painting. Aiden realized that the painting was of Celia herself. She had painted her own story on the walls of this hidden cave. He turned to her, his expression soft with understanding. "You were exiled, weren't you?" he asked gently, using their rudimentary sign language to convey the question. Celia nodded slowly, her eyes filled with a mixture of sadness and acceptance. She pointed to another painting which showed a group of her people standing in a circle, looking stern and disapproving. She mimicked their expressions, then pointed to herself and mimed speaking out. "You spoke against them," Aiden guessed, piecing together her story. "You disagreed with something, and they cast you out?" Celia nodded again, her shoulders slumping slightly. Aiden's heart ached for her. He knew what it was like to feel alone, to be cut off from everything familiar. He reached out and took her hand, giving it a reassuring squeeze. "You're not alone anymore," he said softly. "We have each other now." Celia smiled at him, a genuine smile that lit up her face. She pointed to another painting, a scene of two figures standing side by side, looking out over a vast landscape. One figure was clearly alien, with Celia's distinctive features, and the other was human, drawn in a way that unmistakably resembled Aiden. Aiden's heart swelled with emotion. "Is that us?" he asked, his voice barely more than a whisper. Celia nodded, her eyes shining with warmth. She placed her hand over the painted figures, then over her own heart, and finally on Aiden's chest, right over the pendant she had given him. It was a silent affirmation of the bond they had formed, a promise that they would face whatever came next together. They spent the rest of the day in the cave, sharing stories and learning more about each other's worlds through pictures and gestures. Aiden found himself falling deeper in love with Celia with every passing moment, captivated by her strength, her kindness, and the quiet resilience that lay beneath her gentle exterior. As the sun set, and the cave filled with the soft glow of the fungi, Aiden and Celia sat together, their shoulders touching, their hands intertwined. They looked out at the entrance of the cave where the first stars of the alien night sky were beginning to appear. In that moment, under the vast expanse of the cosmos, Aiden knew that he had found something more valuable than any treasure, more profound than any discovery. He had found love, unexpected, beautiful, and stronger than the vastness of the universe itself. The bond between Aiden and Celia deepened with each passing day, but their growing closeness did not go unnoticed by the dangers lurking in the alien wilderness. The dense forest was not just a paradise, it was a realm of predators and unknown threats. Aiden had grown more accustomed to the rhythms of the planet, but he remained ever vigilant, aware that the beauty around them could easily turn deadly. One morning, as they foraged for food in a grove of towering trees, Aiden noticed a sudden stillness in the air. The usual chorus of alien birds had gone silent, and even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Celia, too, sensed the change. She stiffened beside him, her eyes scanning the shadows with a mix of fear and determination. Before Aiden could ask what was wrong, a low rumbling growl echoed through the trees, vibrating through the ground beneath their feet. Aiden's heart raced as he turned to see a massive creature emerge from the underbrush. It was unlike anything he had ever seen, a hulking predator with scales that glistened like dark metal, eyes that burned with an eerie green light, and a maw filled with rows of razor-sharp teeth. Cilia grabbed Aiden's arm, pulling him back as the creature advanced, its powerful limbs crushing everything in its path. She spoke urgently in her language, pointing towards a cluster of thick trees that offered some cover. Aiden understood the urgency in her voice and nodded, following her lead as they dashed for safety. They sprinted through the forest, dodging between trees and leaping over roots as the beast gave chase, its roars deafening. Aiden could hear its heavy footsteps pounding behind them, getting closer with each stride. His lungs burned, his muscles ached, but he pushed on, driven by the adrenaline coursing through his veins and the instinct to survive. Cilia led them to a narrow ravine, barely wide enough for a person to slip through. She squeezed through first, motioning for Aiden to follow. He pressed himself into the narrow space, feeling the rough stone scrape against his skin as he slipped through the tight gap. The beast roared in frustration, too large to follow them into the crevice. For a moment, they were safe. Aiden and Cilia pressed their backs against the cool stone, catching their breath. The beast snarled and snapped outside, unable to reach them but unwilling to give up the hunt. Aiden could feel Cilia trembling beside him, her breath coming in ragged gasps. He took her hand in his, squeezing it reassuringly. "We'll be okay," he whispered, even though he wasn't sure if she could understand his words. "We'll get through this." Cilia nodded, her grip tightening on his hand. They stayed there for what felt like an eternity, waiting for the beast to lose interest and move on. Finally, after what seemed like hours, the creature let out a frustrated roar and lumbered away, crashing through the forest in search of easier prey. Aiden and Cilia waited a few more minutes to ensure it was truly gone, before cautiously emerging from the crevice. They were shaken, but unharmed. Aiden turned to Cilia, his heart still racing from the close call. "We need to be more careful," he said, his voice low and serious. "This place is more dangerous than we thought." Cilia nodded, her expression solemn. She reached out and touched his cheek, a soft, reassuring gesture that sent a wave of warmth through Aiden. Despite the danger, they were in this together, and that, at least, was something he could hold on to. That evening, Aiden and Cilia returned to their shelter, their nerves still on edge from the encounter with the predator. As the sky darkened, the alien forest around them seemed to come alive with a different kind of energy. The bioluminescent plants began to glow, casting a soft, ambient light across their small camp. The 3 moons of the planet rose, bathing the landscape in a silvery blue light that made everything look ethereal, almost dreamlike. Aiden and Cilia sat together by a small fire, their shoulders touching, a comforting warmth between them. The danger they had faced earlier that day had brought them even closer, their bond forged in the crucible of shared survival. Aiden stared into the flames, his thoughts racing. He knew he was falling deeply in love with Cilia, but he didn't know if she felt the same way. He glanced at her, seeing the soft glow of the firelight on her face, the way her golden hair shimmered in the moonlight. She was beautiful, yes, but there was so much more to her than that. She was brave, kind, and strong in ways he had never seen before. He wanted to tell her how he felt, but he struggled to find the words, unsure if she would understand or even if she felt the same. Taking a deep breath, Aiden decided to take a chance. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the pendant Cilia had given him, holding it up so it caught the light. "Cilia," he said softly, looking into her eyes, "I need to tell you something." Cilia turned to him, her expression curious. Aiden took her hand and placed it over his heart, feeling it beat beneath her palm. He pointed to himself and then to her, trying to find the right words. I love you," he said slowly, clearly, hoping she would understand. For a moment, Cilia just stared at him, her eyes wide with surprise. Aiden's heart pounded in his chest, afraid he had made a mistake, afraid she didn't feel the same. But then she smiled, a radiant, beautiful smile that lit up her entire face. She placed her hand over her own heart, then over his, mirroring his gesture. "Aiden," she said softly, her voice like music in the night air. She spoke a few words in her language, words Aiden couldn't fully understand, but he felt their meaning deep in his soul. She was trying to say she felt the same, that she loved him too. Aiden's breath caught in his throat. He leaned closer to her, his heart hammering with a mixture of excitement and nervousness. Cilia didn't pull away. Instead, she leaned in as well, their faces just inches apart. He could feel her breath on his skin, warm and soft. And then, Under the light of the 3 moons, they kissed. It was a gentle, tentative kiss at first, but it quickly deepened, filled with all the emotions they had been holding back. It was a kiss that spoke of longing, of hope, and of a love that transcended the boundaries of their worlds. When they finally pulled apart, Aiden rested his forehead against hers, his heart full. "I don't know what the future holds," he whispered, "but I know I want to face it with you." Celia nodded, her eyes filled with a mixture of tears and joy. She took his hand in hers, squeezing it tightly. They sat there for a long time, holding each other under the starry sky, the fire crackling softly beside them. The world around them seemed to fade away, leaving only the 2 of them and the love that bound them together. In that moment, Aiden knew he had found something truly extraordinary. He had found a love that was stronger than any force in the universe, a love that made him feel truly alive. And for the first time since he had crash-landed on this alien world, he felt a sense of peace, a sense of belonging that he had never felt before. As they held each other under the starlit sky, Aiden and Celia knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. They had found something rare and precious, something worth fighting for. And with that thought in their hearts, they drifted off to sleep, wrapped in each other's arms, dreaming of a future full of love and possibility. The days following their confession were filled with a newfound sense of purpose and joy for Aiden and Celia. They continued to explore the alien wilderness together, but now their adventures were colored by the warmth of their blossoming love. They shared more than just survival tactics. They shared dreams, hopes, and a desire to understand one another's worlds even more deeply. One day, while exploring a particularly dense part of the forest, Celia led Aiden to a place she had never shown him before. They had been hiking for hours, navigating steep terrain and thick underbrush, when they came upon a hidden valley surrounded by jagged cliffs. At its center stood a tall ancient tree, unlike any Aiden had seen. Its bark was silver, shimmering in the sunlight, and its roots seemed to dig deep into the earth, as if anchoring the entire valley. Celia gestured for Aiden to follow her to the base of the tree. There, half buried beneath a thick layer of moss and leaves, was a small metallic object. Celia knelt beside it and began to clear away the debris, revealing more of its surface. As she did, Aiden saw that it was not just any object, but a beautifully crafted artifact, made of a material that gleamed like polished stone but was lighter, almost ethereal to the touch. The object was about the size of a human hand and shaped like a teardrop. Intricate carvings covered its surface, depicting celestial bodies and star patterns that seemed to dance in the light. Aiden felt a sense of awe as he studied the artifact. It was clearly ancient, yet it seemed to pulse with a strange inner energy. Celia looked at Aiden, her eyes wide with excitement. She spoke a few words in her language, pointing to the artifact and then to the sky. Aiden didn't fully understand, but he could see that this object was significant to her, perhaps a relic of her people, or a link to her past. He gently took the artifact from her, feeling its warmth in his hands. As he examined it, he noticed a small, almost imperceptible button on one side. He pressed it, and to his amazement, the artifact began to hum softly, glowing with a soft blue light. The carvings on its surface lit up, projecting a series of holographic images into the air. Aiden watched in awe as the images unfolded before them, a series of star maps, ancient texts in a language he didn't recognize, and then, most astonishingly, a sequence of scenes showing beings like Celia performing rituals, speaking to the stars, and finally, a message of peace. It was a message of unity between their people and the cosmos, an appeal to seek out new worlds and new understandings. Celia watched the projection with a mixture of wonder and sadness. She touched one of the holographic figures, her eyes reflecting both hope and a deep, unspoken longing. Aiden realized then that this artifact was more than just a relic. It was a bridge to Celia's people, a key to understanding her world and the reasons for her exile. He turned to Celia, his voice soft. "Is this why you were exiled? Because you believed in this?" He gestured to the message of peace being projected before them. Celia nodded slowly, her expression somber. She pointed to the figures in the hologram and then to herself, then mimed speaking out, just as she had shown him before in the cave. Aiden understood. She had tried to share this message with her people, but they had rejected it, fearing change, fearing the unknown. Aiden's heart ached for her. He knew how hard it must have been to be cast out for wanting something better for her people, for wanting peace instead of conflict. He gently took her hand, squeezing it. "We can use this, Cilia," he said, his voice filled with determination. "We can take this back to your people, show them that there is another way. Maybe they'll listen this time." Cilia's eyes filled with a mixture of hope and fear. She nodded slowly, her grip on his hand tightening. She spoke a few words, her voice trembling slightly, but Aiden could hear the resolve in her tone. She wanted to try, to return to her people and make them see the possibilities that lay before them. Together, they made a plan. They would set out on a journey to Cilia's homeland, carrying the artifact as proof of their intentions. It would be a dangerous journey, filled with unknown risks, but they were ready to face it together. For the first time since Aiden had crash-landed on this alien world, he felt a sense of direction, a purpose that went beyond mere survival. As Aiden and Cilia prepared for their journey, they gathered supplies and mapped out the best route to Cilia's homeland. It was a daunting task. The path would take them through treacherous terrain, dense forests, towering mountains, and across a vast desert that stretched to the horizon. But they were determined, their hearts united in their shared goal. Aiden spent hours studying the star maps projected by the artifact, trying to familiarize himself with the constellations that Cilia's people used for navigation. Cilia, in turn, taught him the routes she remembered from her childhood, pointing out landmarks and using their shared language of gestures to explain the safest paths. As they planned, they couldn't help but feel a mix of excitement and fear. Aiden was nervous about the dangers they might face, but he was also filled with hope. He knew this journey was more than just a chance to reunite Cilia with her people. It was a chance to show them that there was another way to live, a way of peace and understanding. The night before their departure, Aiden and Cilia sat by the fire sharing a quiet moment together. The sky above was filled with stars and the 3 moons cast a soft glow over the landscape. Aiden looked at Cilia, his heart full of emotion. "Are you ready for this?" he asked softly, knowing how much was at stake. Cilia nodded, her eyes determined. She placed her hand over his heart, then over her own, a gesture they had come to use to express their bond. "Together," she said in her soft melodic voice, her accent thick but clear. "We go together." Aiden smiled, leaning in to kiss her gently. "Yes," he whispered against her lips. "Together." The next morning they set out at first light. The journey was long and arduous, but Aiden and Cilia moved with a sense of purpose and resolve. They navigated the dense forest with ease, using Cilia's knowledge of the terrain and Aiden's survival skills to avoid danger. They scaled rocky cliffs, crossed raging rivers, and made their way through narrow mountain passes, all the while staying focused on their goal. But as they approached the border of Cilia's homeland, they encountered their first major challenge. A group of scouts from Cilia's tribe spotted them from a distance. The scouts, still wary of outsiders and exiles, quickly moved to intercept them. Aiden and Cilia tried to communicate their peaceful intentions, but the language barrier and the scouts' mistrust made it difficult. Aiden could see the fear and hostility in their eyes, and he knew they would need to show proof of their intentions quickly. He carefully took out the artifact, holding it up for the scouts to see. The scouts hesitated, eyeing the object with suspicion, but as Aiden activated it and the holographic message of peace filled the air, their expressions began to change. The leader of the scouts, a tall figure with stern features, stepped forward, his eyes narrowing as he studied the projection. He turned to Cilia and spoke sharply in their language, clearly questioning her. Cilia responded calmly, pointing to the artifact and then to Aiden, explaining their mission as best she could. After a tense moment, the scout leader nodded slowly. He gestured for them to follow, signaling that they would be escorted to the elders of the tribe. Aiden and Cilia exchanged a relieved glance, knowing that they had passed the first test. But they also knew that the hardest part was still to come. They would need to convince the elders and the rest of the tribe that their intentions were sincere, that peace was a path worth pursuing. As they were led deeper into Cilia's homeland, Aiden's heart beat with a mixture of hope and apprehension. He held Cilia's hand tightly, feeling her strength and resolve through their touch. Whatever happened next, they would face it together. And that thought gave him the courage to keep moving forward, one step at a time, towards a future filled with possibility. Aiden and Celia were led by the scouts through the dense forests and across the vast plains of her homeland. As they drew closer to the central settlement, Aiden could feel the tension in the air. The scouts, though no longer openly hostile, remained wary and guarded. Celia walked beside him, her face a mix of determination and anxiety. She knew the importance of what lay ahead, their chance to change the hearts of her people and to bring about a new era of peace. The settlement itself was a breathtaking sight. It was built high among the towering trees, with intricate walkways connecting homes and communal spaces that seemed to float in the canopy. The architecture was elegant and organic, blending seamlessly with the natural surroundings. As they entered, all eyes were on them, warriors, children, and elders alike, their expressions a mix of curiosity, suspicion, and fear. Aiden could feel the weight of their gazes but held his head high. He knew that they needed to show strength, not as warriors, but as ambassadors of a new possibility. Celia led him through the settlement towards a large platform where the tribal council awaited. The elders, dressed in ceremonial robes adorned with silver and gold threads, sat in a semicircle, their expressions stern and unreadable. The leader of the council, an elderly woman with silver hair and piercing blue eyes, stood as they approached. She spoke in a commanding voice, her words directed at Celia, who bowed respectfully before responding in their native tongue. Aiden could not understand the exchange, but he could see the emotion in Celia's face, the determination and the fear, the hope and the uncertainty. After a tense moment, Celia gestured to Aiden, who stepped forward and held up the artifact. The council members murmured among themselves as the ancient device began to hum, projecting its holographic images into the air. The star maps, the celestial beings, and the message of peace once again filled the space around them. The crowd that had gathered to watch the proceedings gasped in awe. Celia spoke passionately, pointing to the images and then to the people around her. She was explaining the significance of the artifact, the ancient message that had been lost but was now found again. She pleaded for a new path, one where they could embrace their neighbors and the universe, not with fear and conflict, but with understanding and cooperation. The elder council listened intently, their expressions softening as Celia continued to speak. Aiden could see that they were moved, but not yet convinced. He knew this was the critical moment. He stepped forward, carefully choosing his words. "I am Aiden," he began, his voice steady despite the nerves that churned within him. "I come from a distant world, one that once knew only conflict and division. But we learned slowly that there was a better way. We learned to embrace our differences, to build bridges instead of walls." He turned to Celia, his eyes filled with love and admiration. "Celia and I have found something precious in this wilderness. We have found love, a bond that transcends our worlds, and it is this love that has brought us here to share with you this message of hope." He held up the artifact again, letting its light wash over the crowd. "I ask you to consider this chance to change, to forge a new path for your people. The universe is vast, and there is so much we can learn from each other if we choose to open our hearts." The elder with the silver hair studied Aiden carefully, her eyes narrowing as if weighing his words. After a long pause, she raised her hand, signaling for silence. She spoke again, her voice softer this time, and then turned to Celia, asking a final question. Celia responded with a nod, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. She turned to Aiden and spoke the few words in his language that she had learned. "Peace, possible, together." The elder considered this, then slowly nodded. She turned to the crowd, raising her hands in a gesture of openness. She spoke in a clear, resonant voice, and as she did, Aiden could see the tension in the crowd begin to ease. The people began to murmur in agreement, their expressions shifting from suspicion to contemplation. Finally, the elder council, after a brief discussion, announced their decision. They would listen to Celia's plea, consider the message of the artifact, and allow for a period of dialogue and understanding. It was not a full acceptance, but it was a beginning, a crack in the wall of fear and mistrust. As the announcement was made, the crowd erupted into a mixture of applause and cautious whispers. Aiden felt Celia's hand slip into his, and he squeezed it tightly, his heart swelling with relief and pride. They had taken the first step, and while there was still much to be done, they had planted the seeds of change. The days that followed were filled with discussions, meetings, and long conversations under the alien canopy. Celia and Aiden spoke at length with the elders and the people. Sharing stories of Earth and their experiences in the wilderness, they talked about their bond and how love had transcended the barriers of language and culture between them. The artifact became a central point of their discussions, a symbol of a forgotten past and a beacon for a hopeful future. It was displayed in the center of the settlement, its light shining day and night, a constant reminder of the new path being forged. Gradually, more of Cilia's people began to open their minds and hearts. Some of the younger members of the tribe, inspired by Cilia's courage and Aiden's earnestness, became vocal advocates for change. They saw in the couple's love a new way forward, one that could bring prosperity and harmony to their people. Not everyone was convinced, and there were still pockets of resistance. Some of the older warriors, set in their ways, remained wary of outsiders and hesitant to embrace peace. But as the days turned into weeks, even they began to see the benefits of dialogue and cooperation. One evening, under the light of the 3 moons, a formal ceremony was held. The Elder Council, led by the silver-haired woman, announced that they would officially recognize Cilia's vision and begin a process of reconciliation and peace-building. They would reach out to their neighboring tribes and explore new opportunities for trade and cooperation, all under the guidance of the principles set forth by the artifact. Aiden and Cilia stood together, their hands intertwined as the decision was made. They had done it. They had convinced Cilia's people to take the first steps towards peace. It was a monumental achievement, one that filled Aiden's heart with pride and joy. As the crowd cheered and the ceremony continued, Cilia turned to Aiden, her eyes shining with love and gratitude. She spoke softly, her voice filled with emotion. "We did it?" she said in her beautiful accent, her words halting but clear. Aiden smiled, leaning down to kiss her gently. "Yes, we did," he whispered against her lips. "Together." The following days were a whirlwind of activity. The tribe began to make preparations for their new future, forging alliances and establishing connections with other tribes and distant settlements. Aiden, with his knowledge of human technology and diplomacy, played a key role in these efforts, helping to build bridges and foster understanding. Cilia, now regarded as a leader and a visionary, became a symbol of hope for her people. Her courage and determination had paved the way for a brighter future, one where love and unity could overcome fear and division. As the sun set on their final evening in the settlement, Aiden and Cilia stood on a high platform overlooking the lush landscape. The sky was painted with the colors of dusk, and the 3 moons began to rise, casting a silvery glow over the world. Aiden wrapped his arm around Cilia, pulling her close. "What now?" he asked softly, his eyes fixed on the horizon. Cilia leaned against him, her head resting on his shoulder. "We explore," she said with a smile, her voice filled with warmth. "Together? Always." Aiden nodded, feeling a profound sense of peace wash over him. He knew their journey was far from over, but he was ready to face whatever lay ahead, as long as he had Cilia by his side. As the first stars began to twinkle in the night sky, Aiden and Cilia looked out over the world they had come to love, a world that had brought them together against all odds. And in that moment, under the light of the moons and the stars, they knew that they were exactly where they were meant to be, bound by a love that was as vast and infinite as the universe itself.